In 2008, a family you've probably never heard of made $3.7 billion in a single day. And of all the ways they could have celebrated this windfall, they chose to stay completely silent about it. Within just a few decades, people started calling them the most powerful financial dynasty on Earth. Now, the family I'm talking about is quite popular in finance circles because they manage trillions of dollars in assets. They sit on the boards of almost every major corporation. But behind all this respectable investing, the actual source of their power came from controlling what you own without you even knowing it. And it should come as no surprise that the family's biggest advantage is something most people you won't even understand. So buckle in, because today we'll dive deep into the story of the Vanguard Group and the families behind BlackRock and their invisible empire. Modern-day New York stands amongst the richest cities in the world. Its economy produces a GDP of over $2 trillion, and many consider it the financial capital of planet Earth. But if you start digging into who actually owns the companies that make up this wealth, you'll find that the same names keep appearing. And they are BlackRock and Vanguard. Now, these aren't your typical wealthy families with mansions and yachts. They're asset management firms that control over $20 trillion combined. That's more than the GDP of every country except the United States and China. They own pieces of Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Tesla, every bank, every pharmaceutical company, every weapons manufacturer. I mean, think about that for a second. Two firms essentially own significant stakes in almost everything you interact with daily. But here's where it gets really interesting. You see, most people have never even heard of Vanguard. BlackRock at least makes occasional headlines. But Vanguard? They're ghosts. And that's intentional. Vanguard is structured as a privately held company owned by the funds it manages. Which sounds democratic, right? Except nobody really knows who ultimately controls those funds. It's the perfect corporate structure for hiding power. And the people who run these firms aren't doing it from the shadows by accident. They've built a system where they control corporate America without the accountability that comes with traditional ownership. The story of this modern financial empire began in the 1970s with a man named John Bogle. He founded Vanguard in 1975 with a revolutionary idea: index funds. Instead of trying to beat the market, why not just own the entire market? It was brilliant. Low fees, broad diversification, passive investing. Average people could finally access the stock market without getting destroyed by Wall Street fees. And Bogle seemed like a hero, democratizing finance. But what he actually created was something far more powerful, a mechanism for concentrating ownership on an unprecedented scale. Now you're probably wondering, how does owning index funds concentrate power? Well, here's the thing. When millions of people invest in Vanguard index funds, Vanguard becomes the legal owner of those shares. And as the legal owner, Vanguard votes those shares in corporate elections. So even though technically the money belongs to individual investors, the voting power belongs to Vanguard. Do you see the problem here? A handful of people at Vanguard headquarters decide how trillions of dollars in shares vote on corporate boards. They pick sales, they approve mergers, they shape corporate strategy. And the individual investors whose money they're using, they have zero say. By the way, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. And leave comments before anyone else. Use the link in the description. I'd really appreciate it. Anyway, let me give you a quick recap on why this matters so much. So the history is that in traditional capitalism, ownership meant control. If you own shares, you voted those shares. But index funds broke that connection. Now, ownership is separated from control. Millions of people own the money, but a few dozen executives at BlackRock and Vanguard control the voting rights. And here, S wild. BlackRock and Vanguard are often the largest shareholders in competing companies in the same industry. They own massive stakes in Coca-Cola and Pepsi, in Delta and United Airlines, in CVS and Walgreens. So ask yourself, if the same investors own all the competitors, do those companies really compete? Or do they just divide the market and keep prices high? Larry Fink founded BlackRock in 1988, and he built it into the largest asset manager in the world with over $10 trillion under management. Fink is probably the most powerful person in finance that most people have never heard of. He has weekly calls with presidents and prime ministers. He shapes government policy on everything from climate change to corporate governance. And he does it all while managing your retirement fund. BlackRock's Aladdin system, their risk management software, processes over $21 trillion in assets. That's not just BlackRock's money. That's half the world's invested assets running through BlackRock's computers. I mean, think about the power that gives them. They see every trade, every position, every risk in the global financial system before anyone else does. Now, here's where things get controversial. BlackRock and Vanguard are each other's largest shareholders. BlackRock owns Vanguard shares. Vanguard owns BlackRock shares. They sit on each other's boards. Their executives move back and forth between the firms. It's a circular ownership structure that makes it nearly impossible to figure out who actually controls what. And that's not a bug. That's a feature. The opacity's the point. But let's talk about the real impact. Because this isn't just abstract financial theory. When BlackRock and Vanguard own 20% of every major corporation, they have enormous influence over how those companies operate. And they use that influence. They push environmental, social, and governance standards, ESG for short. Now that sounds good, right? Corporations should be responsible. But here's the thing. Nobody elected BlackRock and Vanguard to set social policy. They're private companies making decisions that affect billions of people, and they're doing it using other people's money without those people's consent. Critics argue that this concentration of ownership is killing competition. When the same investors own all the airlines, ticket prices stay high. When they own all the banks, fees don't come down. When they own all the pharmaceutical companies, drug prices keep rising. There's even academic research showing that industries with high common ownership have less competition and higher prices. But BlackRock and Vanguard keep growing. And the scary part, most of their growth is passive. Money just flows into index funds automatically from 401 kiloseconds and pension funds. They don't have to do anything. The system feeds them. Now, the families behind these firms don't live like traditional billionaires. You won't see them on Forbes lists or buying sports teams. They operate through institutions. Larry Fink is worth around $1 billion personally, which sounds like a lot until you realize he controls $10 trillion. The Vanguard executives are even more invisible. They've built power without personality. And that might be the most dangerous form of power. Because you can't vote against it, you can't boycott it, and most people don't even know it exists. Here's something that will blow your mind. In 2020, during the pandemic, BlackRock was hired by the Federal Reserve to manage its bond buying programs. The government literally outsourced monetary policy to the world's largest asset manager. BlackRock was buying its own products with government money. The conflict of interest was staggering, but nobody seemed to care because who else could do it? That's the genius of their position. They've made themselves indispensable. And it's not just the United States. BlackRock and Vanguard have exported this model globally. They own significant stakes in European, Asian, and Latin American companies. They're restructuring capitalism worldwide, creating a system where a handful of firms control the commanding heights of the global economy. Some call it stakeholder capitalism. Others call it corporate feudalism. I think the truth is somewhere in between. But it's definitely not the free market capitalism we learned about in school. So what's the secret to their power? I think it's actually several things working together. First, they exploited a loophole in how index funds work, separating ownership from control. Second, they built technology platforms like Aladdin that made them indispensable to the financial system. Third, they operate through institutions rather than personalities, making them invisible to public scrutiny. Fourth, they used passive investing to create automatic growth that requires no effort. And fifth, they've positioned themselves as responsible stewards pushing ESG, making it hard to criticize them without sounding like you oppose environmental protection or social justice. But we have to ask ourselves, is this kind of concentrated financial power compatible with democracy? BlackRock and Vanguard would argue yes, that professional asset managers make better decisions than individual investors. Critics would argue no, that concentrating this much economic control in two firms creates an unelected oligarchy that shapes society without accountability. I think the truth is complicated. Index funds have genuinely helped millions of people build wealth through low-cost investing, but they've also created a new form of power that we don't fully understand yet. The family that owns the world isn't a family in the traditional sense. If you've made it this far, leave a globe emoji in the comments, because these firms literally own pieces of the entire world. And please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.